Hey everyone, Phreak here. I wanted to record a video on my thoughts on overall game design. And in my opinion, and as unfounded as it may be, I find that there are two major pillars to game design, a lot of subdividing from there, and probably other frameworks that you could use for dissecting a game. This is the thing that I think, and of course you can see it on the topic list right over there. And pillar number one is gameplay. And to oversimplify gameplay, it is every single mouse and keyboard or joystick or whatever click that you make. This is convenient because it allows you to remove things from what could be considered games. For example, watching a video on Netflix requires clicking the play button and doing nothing else. That is basically not a game. Now, the opposite, of course, is not necessarily true. For example, surfing websites can require lots of clicks and button presses and whatever, and those aren't necessarily games either, but it's just a way to sort of describe in very basic terms what gameplay is, and it's your interactions with the medium. So I think gameplay is, generally speaking, divided into two parts. Part one is physical skills. And these are things like landing headshots in first-person shooters. They are physically difficult, requiring lots of very precise hand-eye coordination. Last hitting or dodging skill shots in League of Legends can be hard to time properly, or hard to anticipate what your opponents are up to, and click and move appropriately to get away from things. And of course, this is not just video games as well. I mean, hitting the corner of the goal in soccer or football, based on where you're from, is a physical skill in a game. And that's very important to do. And typically, I consider physical skills to be things that are almost always correct to do, like you've decided this is what you want to do. But then even if you want to do it, actually doing it can be very physically challenging, and failure is likely no matter how good you are. Shooting a three-pointer is worth 3 points in basketball. You can't get more than that, but you don't always land the basket. The other big group of gameplay are mental skills. Mental skills are really just boiled down to making decisions. In Counter-Strike, when do you throw a flashbang or a smoke grenade? When do you wait for it? The actual act of doing it is not that hard, but choosing when to and where to is important. If you're playing League of Legends, when do you gank mid? When do you counter jungle? When do you split push? When do you recall? When do you group and go for Baron? These are all mental skills. The act of walking to Baron is not hard. The act of taking Baron is not all that difficult either, and I'm actually kind of glad it's not very mechanically complex, because the idea of taking Baron should generally be as important regardless of your skill level. And if Baron required 40-man heroic raid coordination, now you can't even make the choice to take Baron at bronze because you can't even clear the encounter. So I'm actually glad, for example, that in a lot of cases, physical skills don't trivialize or remove the options of mental skills, because otherwise they're removed from the game, essentially. And it's not even things like necessarily super hard time pressure in the moment, like in a game like Counter-Strike or League of Legends. You can have lots of time for this. XCOM is a turn-based single-player tactics game. You have all the time in the world to move forward, and there are no mechanical pressures on you at all, because there's no time pressure at all. You can take as much time as you need, and yet when to move forward, which abilities to use is very important. How you progress your character in an RPG, what things you research, where you allocate attribute points. These are all mental skills and are very satisfying. Puzzle games, for example, very rarely have mechanical components to them, or at least not difficult ones, and yet figuring out the puzzle is the gameplay, and I actually quite enjoy puzzle games. One thing I want to point out, though, in terms of gameplay, is that tuning is absolutely required. Otherwise, you make gameplay obsolete. That's the word. Tuning can absolutely remove gameplay or make it obsolete. For example, let's say we're playing a first-person shooter, and I've said that shotguns deal 9 million damage per pellet and fill the whole screen. Well, you've removed aiming from the equation, because as long as you're on my screen at all, you've instantly died to my shotgun blast. Also, why buy any other guns? You'll instantly die to a shotgun. Sniper rifles don't exist. Congratulations. You have, via tuning, ruined both mental and physical skills in the game. Obviously, no one does this. No one plays that game. Another good example for League of Legends is 5 Karthus in One for All is actually a disabled champion, because if every champion dies every 120 seconds with basically no physical or mental counterplay available, you've now dumbed down the game and it's no longer worth playing. There's a reason that champion is not enabled for One for All, and I think that's completely reasonable. The second major pillar, though, of game design is, I think, poorly described, but I can't come up with a better one. It's flavor. And flavor is literally everything else that is not gameplay. It is graphics and sound and voiceover and music and feedback for your actions and presentation and tone and characters and story and world and absolutely everything. Now, notably, I want to point out that a story and a world and characters can stand out on their own. Movies and books and music and paintings and dance and all kinds of art exist that are wonderful, fine mediums. They're just not games. Games require interaction. And not all games, of course, need to be like movies. I mean, Geometry Wars is a great little arcade game that has some presentation to it, has some flavor to it. It's a quite fun Xbox Live arcade game, but doesn't really tell you a story, and it doesn't need to. But the flavor reinforces the gameplay, right? Flavor, as we talk about now, the intersection of these two things, flavor are all of the assets that reinforce the game. And similarly, gameplay is all of the functionality, all of the interactions that reinforce the world. And the best games, the games that truly stand out and are amazing, have these two pillars interlinked very, very well. And this interlink goes back and forth and back and forth, like they borrow from each other constantly. And again, I love the example of headshots in first-person shooters, because conceptually, no matter what game we're talking about, you think, yeah, shooting someone in the head probably does more damage. And in a lot of cases, especially if the game is going to look realistic, shooting them in the head is supposed to kill them in one shot. And indeed, in Counter-Strike, for most guns, shooting them in the head kills them outright. And what's great is shooting them in the head is hard. It is a relatively small part of the body, and physically making that action is going to be hard. And now I'm going to do a little example here. All right, I'm holding my hand up, okay? Now what I want you to do on the count of 3 is grab your mouse and flick over and click on the ring on my finger. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, by this point you've now unpaused or simply not done it. I'll bet you trying to click on my wedding ring was not satisfying. It's about as mechanically complex as getting a headshot in Quake or Unreal Tournament or Counter-Strike, but all that happened was the video stopped playing, which, to be fair, for many of you is a reward in its own right, but for many of you who have got this far in the video, not very satisfying. Because in games like Quake and Unreal Tournament and Counter-Strike, they reward you for making a good mechanical play, right? There's a little pop-up in the top right corner that says, oh, this kill was a headshot kill, not a regular kill. There is no mechanical difference as far as the overall story of the game in a headshot kill versus a regular kill. Kills are kills in almost every first-person shooter, but headshot kills, those have rewards that are purely flavor. Now, of course, the mechanic of getting a headshot can sometimes have a mechanical reward as well. Killing someone 2 bullets sooner is very valuable, of course. So there are sometimes mechanical rewards to mechanics, which is why physical mechanics even exists, because if there weren't mechanical rewards, you might not even want to do it. It's one of the things that actually changed, for example, between Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2. Headshots didn't exist in Mass Effect 1, but the shooter gameplay got a lot nicer in ME2, and part of that was adding headshots. Of course, League of Legends has this intersection of mechanics and flavor as well. Yasuo is the most popular champion in League of Legends, and he's a Wind Samurai. What do you think Wind Samurai do? Well, he's got a sword. It is an obvious point of power. Almost all of his damage comes from swinging his sword at you and slashing you with his sword. So with playing as Yasuo and against Yasuo, the things he does make sense. But of course, he harnesses the power of wind, which means he probably knocks you up. In fact, he does. And he has synergy with other knockups. If you're in the air, you're in his element. You're no longer grounded. You're in the air. You're airborne. I can jump to you. And like it's Dragon Ball Z, we're flying together and I'm slashing you up. You're in my element now. You're weakened. Right? Wind moves fast. It moves around. It's transitory. Yes, he in fact protects himself with wind. By moving back and forth, he creates a shield around himself harnessed by wind. When he puts a wind wall, it knocks down projectiles, right? It's very particular in what it blocks. It's things that are relying on the wind to get to you. You throw out a hook. Ah, no, the wind can knock that aside. I think it's very interesting, right? These things all reinforce each other quite well. And in fact, even the warnings are based in wind. When Yasuo powers up and is allowed to throw a tornado out of his sword, again, the power of wind very strong with him, he gets art and sound and visuals that amplify. He has a tornado revolving around him to show you he is going to shoot that tornado out of the tip of his sword. Right? These things all reinforce each other. The flavor of Yasuo the Wind Samurai works well with the mechanics of Yasuo the Wind Samurai, and they all work together and make sense, and everything lines up well. Witcher 3 is a very grim, dark sort of game where a lot of things suck, and you make a lot of grim, dark, morally gray choices because there are no really true good guys, not necessarily. What's interesting is superimposed on this super sort of grim world is family. One of the most tragic characters you run into in that game, the Bloody Baron, is worried about where his family has gone, what's happened with them. It's one of the very first major quests you deal with, is his family. And in fact, the main quest around Geralt himself is about his family and whether Ciri is going to be his adopted surrogate daughter or not. You can have more than one theme. And Witcher 3, while it has gameplay and everything else, a big tenet of that game is your mental choices. Not only your strategy in approaching combat, but your actual choices with the world. And your choices around morally gray yes-no answers and family are reinforced by the world having a morally gray outlook and family all around. And those are just simply two topics I brought up because I thought about them recently when kind of scripting out this video. One other thing I want to talk about as we kind of wind down this intersection of gameplay and flavor is something that I call the Tooltip Test. Now, I did not come up with this. I heard it several years ago, but I really, really like it. And it's, do things look like what they do, or do they do what they look like? And specifically, can you understand most of what an ability does without reading the manual? Or can you expect what a gun will do simply by looking at it? Like if you've never played Counter-Strike, I'm going to tell you the most expensive gun in the game is a very large sniper rifle. What do you think happens when you shoot someone with the most expensive sniper rifle in the game? With only one bullet. Most guns don't kill in one bullet. The $4,700 sniper rifle does. If you've never played Counter-Strike before, what do you think happens when you shoot someone in the head? You probably do more damage. In fact, you're right, it does. And without ever reading the manual, you probably got that one right. And this is using abilities in an RPG or a MOBA. What do you think a fireball does when you cast it? This is looking at the interface in a turn-based tactical game. When you have your guy selected and a bunch of squares on the map are highlighted, are those squares places you can move? If some of those squares are a different color, does that mean that's what the dash action would take you to? Those are the farther away squares, right? The idea of taking a dash action, does that make sense that it might remove your ability to attack because you move twice as far, right? These things can all make sense and are intuitive without reading the manual. Again, these are all topics that can make a lot of sense. Now, I don't think that the tooltip test is wholly binding. I don't think it's going to, I don't think that an ability or gun that fails the tooltip test is necessarily a bad ability. But it's something to keep in mind because games, I think, are not playable if they're not approachable. I think there's plenty of games out there that could have incredibly deep gameplay, an incredibly deep story, and incredibly good flavor. But if your players are unable to appreciate what the gameplay is and what actions they can take and what decisions they can make, then I think your game doesn't attract anyone, and then no one plays it and figures out the depth. To a certain level, things have to be approachable or they don't get played at all. And those reinforcements need to kind of come from all angles. In the best games, again, they're reinforced everywhere. But again, I want to point out that there is room for small bits of obtuseness, as long as you're making a good trade-off for it. In fact, the final thought I will give you is that game design, much like almost everything in life, has trade-offs. Choosing to do one thing might be very good on one axis and bad on another. And your goal as a designer of games or anything is to maximize goodness over badness. That's all we ever do in this world, and that's the thought I'm going to leave you with. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.